Okay, here we go, Mr. Boone. Since you weren't able to come up and see it, and I gotta be up here today, this would be a good time to do a walk around on a lovely, wet Saturday logging conference day. So I guess you could say that the undercarriage is a lot similar to a West Coaster. I mean, I think they're 8230s, I think. This is an 8240 undercarriage. Like I told you today, there's only really 4 of these made like this, maybe 5. It's been repowered. Before I hired on in 2013, it was repowered with the silver 8V92. It had an 8V71 in it, and I guess it decided it wanted to have some cylinder cancer, is what I've understood from that. Undercarriage is actually in pretty good shape for how old it is. The tube cylinder actually comes down and hooks into this spot here for when you lower the tube, instead of like on the tank mount where it comes way down out here somewhere. This door opens, which exposes all the bull gears inside and frictions. Yeah, skid line friction, haul back friction, the skyline one's way in the back. The grease lines on this, I've separated each other out when we rebuilt it. I have some fixing to do because there's obviously a few of them that are broke since I ran it last and I was gone for a year. But what I mean by split in half, there used to be, this is part of the panel, and the panel used to be on the back. All the grease hoses ran across the transmission inside. See, there's the other half of it. So what I did is I redid every single grease line, split the machine in half, basically. So all the bearings and everything that gets greased on this side of the machine all run along the wall to this bank. Same with the other one. All the grease lines and bearings on this side go to that bank. Basically, if you got grease hose that's broke, you'll see it because it'll, be dripping grease down alongside one of the walls, instead of over the transmission making a gigantic mess for somebody. Typically, the poor yarder engineer to clean up later, because this goes to the shop every job to get cleaned out. If I remember, yeah, right there. So that is the number off the cat end of this. It's kind of hard to see. But it says 8240 5195 CA, which is the undercarriage serial number on this. And under here, this little sight glass, which is kind of hard to see, but that's how you check. You can kind of see an outline of a V. There used to be a cover plate over that, and when we redid the transmission FCB unit, which is in this, I decided to take that off, and lo and behold, there's a sight glass with a mark on it to show you the level of oil in the housing. And this holds, if I remember correctly, 53 gallons of oil, 10 weight, in this box. Now, none of this was in here when we rebuilt it. These were not here. This is an aftermarket filter system for the transmission. This was actually longer. It had a dipstick that went down in there, which wasn't really usable, in my opinion. Basically, all these hoses and everything work when you crawl, they all play a major role in switching between crawl and yard. And it goes up into this box, which is, it's got the sticks that I was telling you that basically come off of a dozer. This is how I steer the machine when I'm crawling. And we put on here, cut a hole inside the cab, and did all that kind of stuff to make it work right. But there's the Skyline brake, fairly accessible. There's normally another door on the front of this on this side. But typically, what happens is it's usually pretty vulnerable to getting wiped out. In this case, it got wiped out. I was not the one to do it. There will be, the door is actually at our shop, and I'll be putting it back on when we move to the shop, because I want a door on there just to protect all of that as much as humanly possible. This whole deal here is just for static line, really. That's all it's really used for, and it's got bolts. They're actually not fun to try to loosen or anything because they're in really odd spots, but this is what we tie the hull back up to that side, and the static guy on this side goes to right here. This is the hydraulic tank that actually it is in a horrible place. That was another thing that got redone. It used to sit back in that hole. Now, as you can imagine, trying to put hydraulic in this tank would have not been very fun back in there, let alone if you had a leak, because none of that would have been accessible whatsoever. And that's actually where originally the grease hoses ran, was right through back here on the other side of the brake and underneath the transmission, which we changed all of that. This has actually got a bigger filter on it now with a new system, because the old one, you couldn't get parts for it anymore. So that's all been updated. Let's stick it down. Two of these tanks are the original ones that were on it. This one, being a different color, is actually off of an Edco Mustang, which we have as well. We have an Edco Mustang on the other side. So we had extra parts laying around, and we went ahead and replaced the broken tank with that one, since they were similar. So that would explain why that one's an odd color. But still the same configuration nonetheless. This one has 4 guy lines. This being number 1. That's number 2. The top one's 3. What the closest cab is 4. Some of the whistle commands, which everybody has their own take on what they use for different things, so you don't really go by what's on the paper. Another thing about the guy lines, number 2 is the worst one to try to fix or work on because of where it's at. It's just in a hole. The Skyline, 1 inch. You got, 2,700 feet, I think, of this on here. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've actually put a full drum back on here and known what it was. Tube, actually the ladder is actually still on this one, and so is the secondary ladder up top, which is actually a little sketchy because most of the welds on the second ladder up there are cracked or broke. So needless to say, I've only gone up there a handful of times when need be. A-wire drum, skid line, haulback, and tagline drum. Now this is an interesting feature. Most guys would use both these drums for road change. We do not. And actually what we use it for is keeping the skid line out of the chute and out of the way of the processor. Usually I've got more line on here. This is just, I need to add another section to it and get the drum actually functioning. The lever inside is broke for it. I came back to find that. But anyways, this is tied off here, and it goes up there to the car. You can see there's uh, a block on, well, to me, it's the back of the car. People call it the front. And it's got a sleeve shackle on it. And so what happens is when I ship the car back, that block follows and it takes the tag line here and it runs out on the line until it comes up tight and stops, and it'll hold the skid line. The skid line goes through that block and into the car. So when the car leaves the block, the skid line is still suspended in the air and stays out of the chute for for a little ways. It's really nice. It's really convenient, and we have used that ever since I started working here in 2013, and I swear by it. If this drum fills up when we're doing road change, we just pull some off and add more to it. That's, might take a little bit longer than just switching over to another drum, but as far as being able to do this whole tagline block system, that's where the real money's at. Front static guys. Also, the antenna for the whistle box, I had an extra long cable made with an antenna, and the antenna is actually up there on the tagline fair lead, all the way at the top. It gives me a little extra range than normal, so that's kind of a benefit. The water system on this yarder is actually tied together, the radiator and brake system. So this little valve here, periodically I'll just come out and I'll twist it open and bleed it out, let the air out until the water comes out, and we're good to go, just so it bleeds the air a little bit out of the system, so that way you don't blow the heads off the motor or something like that, which would pretty much ruin your day for a few days. There's the hydraulic cylinder system for the guy lines and the tube, which are in here. This is not the seat that was originally in here by any means. They actually had an old, I guess, John Deere tractor seat for a while. They used a bucket, and then they had an old bus seat, and the bus seat gave out, and when we redid the transmission, I brought this nice seat from home, and we welded it on, and needless to say, it's been in here ever since. Got a heater, which actually keeps me very nice and warm in here, which is ran off of water temperature from the motor. My guy line controls for the tube. This is for guy line 3, 4, 2, and 1. That's the tube. And the dogs for those are on the floor right below them. And cheater box. Tag line. Basically, this is normal 071, basically, right here. Other than your throttle is right here because I have a 3-speed transmission. So, forward, neutral, reverse. I always leave it in second, third. So, that's how that is. Your crawler clutch is normal. Here's the little system for crawling, basically. So I pull this stuff out. Go like this. So if I pull these in and release them, it changes the pressure and where it goes. So now, if I were to start this up and try to do anything, all I'm going to try to do is move the yarder on the tracks. It's not going to be moving drums or anything like that. And then when you want to change back over, you just flip this up to right here, and it changes the flow of fluid, and you go back to yarding. And of course, if you pull those both in, it locked both tracks like a brake, but you still always set the crawler brake anyways, just so that way you're parked in one spot. Very old whistle equipment. This has been in here probably since the very beginning, and it shows its age in the way it acts most days, especially in the wintertime when it's cold, because a lot of times it doesn't like to cooperate. This is fairly new. I remember putting that in here 2 years ago or so. The other nifty little thing is the other 071s I ran when you would do a downhill show. You would always set your pressures on your hand valves. So, you know, if you were bringing the car in, you know, this one would be all the way up and you would set this one as a designated pressure. You can't do that on this yarder when you do like a downhill show, because the brakes in this are backwards compared to any of the other yarders I've ran. 071 anyways. These up here are for band brakes, not water brakes. The foot pedals on the floor are my water brakes. So when I'm doing downhill, I'm using the foot ones instead of the hand ones, which is backwards compared to what I've done in the past, because normally I would set one of these to, you know, 15, 20 pounds and just leave it alone, bringing the car in or out. But I actually do it with the foot pedals in this. And it actually makes things more interesting because you've got one foot on a brake pedal, you're using your right hand for throttle, and you're crossing your hands sideways because you're doing functions with here while doing this and shifting at the same time. So it makes things really interesting and fun. I find it enjoyable personally myself. And up here we have turbo boost gauge, which works. Oil pressure works. Water temperature works. And it usually runs at about 180, 190. We made it so the engine runs a little bit cooler. Can't find these gauges anymore, so this is an aftermarket oil pressure gauge, which is my main air tank gauge, and it works just fine. These work. This one's been broke for years. They work. My haulback water temperature, my brake pressure in the system, and my skid line brake temp. And typically I don't ever see those come up above 100 unless it's like really hot in the summertime and we're, you know, downhilling where I'm using brake pressure quite a bit for things. Temperature for the transmission. It did work when we rebuilt the transmission and we put new gauges in here. Why it doesn't work anymore since I came back, I'm not sure, but I'm going to fix that. With this setup here, if I'm pulling for a long period of time, I don't let it sit on 200. I wouldn't let it sit on 220 or go above that for more than about 14 seconds. If it goes to 220, it says right here, trans temp 220 max. This is the FCB unit, which is in the big housing down there. That's the temperature for that, which you'd think those two would kind of run together since it's the same oil, but it's not the case. And this is the pressure. But if this goes to 220 and stays there for more than about 14 seconds, the oil in the transmission loses its viscosity. I'm not sure how to say that word. And basically you start burning up the clutch plates inside the transmission, which is essentially what happened to it the first time. It had done that enough that it had wore out the discs and basically ruined the transmission. And then that's basically when we wound up rebuilding and trying to tear it out. And it was on a job when we did that, and it wasn't very fun. That was about 3.5, 4 months of tearing apart, rebuilding, modifying, because the transmission sits back there in the middle, basically. It's not a very work-friendly environment. It's covered in tacky lube, and it's not enjoyable. And to get it, we had to dig a trench underneath the yarder and put belting and plywood down and use a choker up through the top of the drums to drop the transmission down and yard it out, and in the same way to put it back in. And you've got to be laying underneath that with just a choker wrapped around it. And I'm going to tell you what, it's not a very comforting feeling knowing that you've got, I think it was 16,000 pounds of a transmission just a foot away from your face. So, but anyways, this is kind of my little walk around of this old girl. I don't have the tag for the yarder part on hand. I do have it around. I do have pictures of it. But this is basically a Terex madill yarder. So hope you enjoy, Daniel.